Computer. Okay. And thank you, all of those of you who are back tonight. Thanks so much for joining us again. We have a few other people that'll be dialing in with YouTube later on. So we're up to chapter 17. And a couple of these chapters are some of my favorite ones. Yeah, this one is one of my favorite ones. The highest teacher is not known by others. This is part of this idea of the Taoist master or the sage being invisible to the rest of the world. I studied with a Taoist priest woman many years ago, actually the woman that Roger studied Chinese medicine with in Hawaii. And she was talking about her becoming invisible and how it was so helpful for her when she was waiting in line to go to the movies. She would just go up in front of the line because she could make herself invisible. But the real idea of being invisible in the Taoist sage is because they're not somebody you might notice right away. They're not someone who's presenting themselves as a Taoist master or a spiritual master. You know, they may be someone very humble. You know, like that fellow that Leslie that you and I and our folks visit every year when we go to China, Jia, the old grandfather, who just looks like this toothless old guy living in a cave, but actually has been cultivating for many years and has a really strong spiritual aura. But if you saw him in the crowd, you might think he was just some colorful old farmer or some funky old farmer with his little Taoist outfit. So the real sage, the real teacher, is someone who doesn't necessarily charge a lot of money for their sessions, somebody who calls themselves Grandmaster so-and-so and charges thousands of dollars. It could be your neighbor, or it could be anyone you have your teacher could be anyone that you have any kind of interaction with. And if you have your eyes open so that you notice those kinds of interactions, you're more likely to meet a teacher. So the highest teacher is not known by others. The next highest teacher has followers who love and praise her. That's someone who has a cult following, people who really feel like they are some sort of ascended master and that their master is better than everyone else's master, or their teacher is better than anyone else's teacher. The next highest have followers who fear her. Then we've got people like Mao Zedong, Donald Trump, these megalomaniac kind of leaders who rule by fear and intimidation. And there are teachers, so-called spiritual teachers, who also rule by intimidation. That's not something that's just politicians. So we're going from the highest to the lowest. The very lowest has followers who scorn her. If one does not trust, she will be considered untrustworthy. So if you don't have trust in yourself, in your own process, in the unfolding of the universe, unfolding of your life, of Tao, then you will not be considered a trustworthy person. The highest teacher acts in a leisurely manner. She chooses her words carefully and does not waste them, so not talking too much. When this last line is the most important. When she accomplishes things, her followers think they have accomplished it themselves. So not only does she not take the credit, she actually able to contrive it as something that just naturally happened. There's a term in Taoism called ziren. Ziren means, like, in English means of itself so, or something that's self-creating, that just happens naturally, that just unfolds in the moment, is ziren. And that's a very high level that Taoists want to apply themselves to. But I love this part about she accomplishes things, but not only does she not take credit, but her followers think, or her students think, that they came up with it themselves. That's really, that's a very high level teacher. There is an old Taoist tradition of being invisible to the world. This is part of being humble and not calling attention to oneself. Lao Tzu says the highest level teachers use their own example, how they live, how they respond to the challenges of life in such a graceful manner that people cannot even tell they are teaching. They're imparting lessons and advice and inspiration and illumination, but it's not, now I'm going to do a spiritual teaching. Now I'm going to enlighten you. It's just the way they relate to other people in a very humble way and in a very natural way and in a very authentic way. Remember that Genren, authentic person, is the high level enlightened person in Taoism. Many religious groups control followers through fear. People become fearful of being punished, of going to hell, being reborn into a lower level incarnation, experiencing bad karma or bad luck. They only live virtuous lives in order to escape punishment and suffering. This is not true spiritual liberation. And of course, many religions, that's how they control people, is through fear, right? They have these rules that they lay down, and if you go break any of the rules, even though the priesthood is allowed to break, seems like they can break any rules they want, then people are punished. Remember, there are two streams of Taoism today, Daojia and Daozhou. Daojia means family Taoism, or non-religious Taoism, or lay Taoism. People like us who follow Taoism and follow the teachings and the philosophy and the practices, but aren't interested in becoming a priest or a monk or a nun in the Taoist church. And the Taoist church, Daozhou, has a lot of folk beliefs entwined with it. So they actually have different heaven layers and hell layers in the Taoist religion. And they have gods and goddesses. And they deified Lao Tzu. It's really funny. Lao Tzu was a teacher 2,500 years ago and an enlightened master, I feel, many people feel. But he never presented himself as a deity. And now you go to China and they have statues of him everywhere. And there's all this mythology that he was self-born from his mother's womb. And he came out, he was already 80 years old with a long white beard and all those kinds of things, because many people feel the need for deities. They feel the need for a religious organization of some kind, where original Taoism didn't have that and didn't feel the need for that. Original meaning the Taoism of Lao Tzu and Chuang-Tzu and the early masters. Because religious Taoism wasn't done until 1,000 years after Lao Tzu is when the religious Taoism became. I want to make sure I'm recording here. Looks good. And I have friends in Taoist religion. I have friends in China and in the US who are Taoist priests. And so they do a lot of ritual and things like that. And ritual is, one teacher of mine told me many years ago, ritual is a beautiful thing because it connects us to what we call our reptile mind, or our really ancient part of our limbic system. And I enjoy a good ritual, not too complicated a ritual, but just lighting incense, bowing a few times, saying a few, I'm going to send you guys some of these, they're called invocations that I do every morning that come from my teacher at Hua Ching Ni, that are just very nice affirmation kind of things and connecting you to your divine self and to your divine helpers and assistants. So I'll send those to you tomorrow when I send out the link to this video. So I like to think of people who follow the Taoist path as free thinkers and people who value their spiritual freedom, and that we are free people and we're not afraid of being judged by some wrathful deity, or even be judged by society because we're not following the rules of society in West or East. And I find that people that are drawn to these kind of practices, Taoist practices, Qigong, Taiji practices, tend to be people that are more liberated in their thoughts and their feelings. I'm sure a lot of you folks would probably feel the same way about yourself. So the practice in this one is called letting go. And remember when we did on chapter 16, which was the one we just ended with last week, was Zolong, which was forgetting, sitting and forgetting. This is another aspect of that practice. Instead of sitting and forgetting, we are letting go. We are releasing. We're releasing all the thoughts, ideas, and opinions about what we think we need. We practice releasing as a way to soften our heart and open our mind. And remember, mind and heart are connected in Taoism. By softening our heart, we also open our mind. And by opening our mind, we soften our heart. In this way, we will reach a state of complete openness and relaxation, which will in turn allow the wisdom and grace of the ancient masters into our heart mind. So shall we do a few minutes of this releasing? So sitting and closing the curtain, drawing down the curtain, closing our eyes, tip of the tongue to the roof of our mouth, breathing in and out of our nose, breathing into lower dantian. And this one, we're going to breathe into our middle dantian, into our heart center. And I think I mentioned before that in Taoist thought, the heart is the emperor of all the other organs. And of course, in the West, we really value intellectual knowledge very highly, much more than emotional knowledge or body knowledge. And so even in China, intellectual knowledge was valued very, very highly, even in ancient times. The highest level of society were the scholars, and then the farmers, and then the merchants, and then the soldiers at the bottom. So scholars were considered very, very high level. But Lao Tzu was saying, don't emphasize intellectual learning. Remember, it's intellectual learning gets us into trouble a lot of times. Not that we need to be ignorant, not that we can't study things, but we don't depend on it totally. So we're sitting quietly and breathing into our heart center and then out of our heart center. Breathe in, we feel our heart center open and expand. We breathe out, it contracts, not all the way, but just a little bit, just enough to let any stress in our system out. So we breathe in, feel it soften and open, breathe out any stress. And this is a process of releasing. So we're releasing worries, concerns, fears, excitements, plans. Not that we can't go back and experience them and work with them when we're done, but for just this few moments together, we're going to release all those things. Even your exciting thoughts of what plans are coming up or your fearful thoughts about what's coming up, releasing all of that. We release your need to attain some kind of higher plane of existence, some sort of what we might think of as spiritual. Even release thoughts of being a quote spiritual person. And release your idea of what a spiritual person is, your concept of what a spiritual person is. Release your need for approval, not only from the world or your spouse or your relatives or your job, but even release your need for approval from the higher realms. This one can be difficult because we want approval from the spiritual realm. It means we're doing our spiritual work in the right way, but we need to let go of that even, because that can become an attachment that can get in our way. Sometimes in Zen we talk about how attachment to becoming enlightened is what exactly keeps you from becoming enlightened, or keeps you from realizing that you are already enlightened. Release your need to be right, to be correct, to doing it right, to even doing this practice right. Release your wish to become wise or to be recognized by others as wise. We'll see in a couple of chapters ahead where the real Taoist often feels or seems stupid and dull to other people. Release your ideas about what a sage is, what an enlightened person is, what a liberated person is. Just being your natural self. That I release that idea, that need or wish to become a spiritual leader or high spiritual person. Because these are all just mind concepts. And we're releasing the mind. We're opening the heart. We're softening the heart. We're opening the mind. We're releasing these intellectual ideas about spirituality and spiritual person and enlightenment and attaining Tao and all these kinds of concepts. We're letting ourselves release all of that. And this is something that you can do moment by moment all through your life. Whenever you come up against something that you feel is a concept or a construct of the mind that's maybe getting in the way of where you want to be in your life, in your career, in your spiritual life, something that seems so important and so huge and so solid becomes, as the Buddhists say, are just empty. It's emptiness. It's a concept, a construct. Form is not different from emptiness. Emptiness not different from form. Form is the emptiness. Emptiness is the form. This is the practice, sitting and releasing, sitting in silent, attentive relaxation, forgetting whatever needs to be forgotten. This is the goal and the journey. This is the lesson and the reward, the challenge and the sweet spot of surrender. Then, forgetting what is of no importance, recall what is important. Pay attention to your teachers, whether you know them or not, whether they are recognized as, quote, teachers, whether they have been in your life for many years or only showed up for a moment. Give thanks for all you have and all you will have. Give thanks for the challenges as well as the blessings. Remember, with gratitude comes grace. So we bring our palms together and rub them 36 times. Mm.
Lala, I have a quick question.
Yes.
Why do we rub our palms together 36 times and put them over our face?
It's just to kind of wake yourself back up,
Oh, okay.
go into a deep meditative state. And then remember, we do everything in multiples of 9. So that's why you do
Yeah.
it 6 times.
Okay, but I don't think you ever explained why we.
Probably not. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, chapter 17. Now we're up to chapter 18. When great Tao is abandoned, then benevolence, Ren, and righteousness, Yi, appear. Now, in Lao Tzu's time, there were two big schools of thought, two of the main schools of thought anyway, was Confucianism and Taoism. And Confucianism was taught by Gongfuzi, who we call Confucius these days, but his whole idea of society and culture was that everybody knowing their place in society and staying there. And of course, women were at the very lowest rung of society. Even cultured married couples, if the man wanted to give a cup of tea to his wife, he couldn't just put it in her hand. He had to put it on a tray and then hold the tray out to her. Women, like well-bred women, were given these little books on how to comport themselves among men, and were taught things like women should always assume she's wrong in any argument or discussion. Women should walk backwards out of a room if it's a room of men so she doesn't turn her back on them. And so Confucius was popular, not so much in his time. He was actually kind of a failed scholar, but later times he became very popular because the rulers liked the fact that everybody would stay in their place in society, where the Taoists were about being free. Remember, about being free individuals, Zhenren, authentic individuals. And so this idea, this term Ren, righteousness, and Yi are Confucian terms that people used. But the Taoists felt like it was more something that was put on from the outside. It wasn't something coming really from their heart. So they often made fun of Confucius, especially in the Chuang-Tzu book. He makes fun of Confucius quite a bit. When great Tao is abandoned, then benevolence and righteousness appear. Then intellect and cleverness rules, and great hypocrisy arises. When the family is no longer in harmony, filial piety and duty arise. Filial piety and duty, instead of people just treating each other well and loving each other because it was a natural thing to do, the family is no longer in harmony, and so these rules of filial piety, where the sons have to come out in the morning and bow to their father, and the father is head of the family and the daughters are way down below. And he says, when the country is in confusion, trouble arises. Then come the loyal ministers, or he calls them loyal ministers. What he means is the corrupt officials. Zhuangzi says, our lives as well as our minds are limited, our intellectual minds. To try and understand that which is unlimited with the limited is foolish and dangerous. So not only does he say it's very difficult and foolish, but it could even be dangerous. So this one is not a practice we need to do together, but this is something has some little ideas about how to experience yourself as your unlimited self, your Tao self. So we're going to move on to the next one, chapter 19. And this is something he says over and over. This is very interesting. Abandon sageliness, renounce intellectual knowledge, and the people will be 100 times better off. So in here, Lao Tzu is advising us to abandon our illusion that we know something about what it is to become or be a sage or enlightened being. A lot of people talk about enlightenment, but very few really know what it means. There's another term for enlightened being, which is an immortal. And the term for that is Shenren. Shenren is the character is a person next to a mountain. So it's like a person is like one line with one little leg, like a little stick figure walking along. And then two characters, like one character rather, like that is mountain. So a mountain person is considered an immortal. And remember a very long time ago, 6 weeks ago or something, I was talking about De and how it was believed in nature and in the mountains there was more natural spiritual potency. And so hermits and Taoist seekers would go into the mountains. That's why they came up with this character for person and mountain. Mountain person was the immortal. And they mean spiritual immortal. I mean, people lived a long time. I think I mentioned I have a book about a sage who lived for 250 years in our time. And they have proof all through the book of all the various times, different newspapers and different emperors and all this history of when they met this guy and interacted with this guy over 250 years. It's a pretty interesting book. It's by Stuart Alva Olson. And maybe I'll find it before you leave. I could tell you the title. Zhuangzi offers some insight through a description of this kind of person. Now, this is really like the highest level person he's talking about. In the far-off mountains of Ku, there lives a holy woman whose skin is as white as snow and who is as gentle as a child. She does not eat of the 5 grains, but lives off air and dew. You know, ancient Taoists didn't eat grains. It's called bigu. Bigu can mean not eating grains, or it can also mean what it says here, living off air and dew, or qi, people who fast for months at a time, if not years. It's interesting that ancient Taoist texts say, avoid the grains. They were kind of the original low-carb people. She flies through the air on a chariot made of clouds, drawn by dragons, and wanders where she pleases, all along the 4 seas. Her spirit is so concentrated that she has amazing powers of healing and can help people bring in a bountiful harvest. She roams far and wide throughout the world of the 10,000 beings and brings them all into unity as one. She is beyond strife and confusion of the world and has no need to interact with it. So she's more of a hermit kind of person. He Shengong says, throw away wisdom and sagacity and return to non-action. Look at simplicity and hold fast to naturalness. So not trying to set up this idea of becoming a sage, becoming a, oops, where did I go? Abandon sageliness, abandon trying to become, working so hard to become enlightened that it stops you in your spiritual growth. Be natural, be yourself, practice wu-wei. Abandon, quote, benevolence, reject, quote, righteousness, which are also Confucian terms, and people will naturally refer to filial piety and compassion. They will naturally honor their relations, their parents, their grandparents, their ancestors. Give up cleverness and discard selfishness, and there will be no bandits and thieves. So give up this idea of being clever, of being intellectually superior to other people because you went to a fancy college and they didn't. They just live in a cave and they're barely literate. Yet these 3 things, abandon benevolence, reject righteousness, give up cleverness, these 3 things are considered outward things only. They are not quite sufficient. Take this advice: know the plain and embrace simplicity. Reduce your sense of self and lessen your desires. Give up intellectual learning and you will have no worries. So intellectual learning doesn't mean just studying books and going to college. It means living your life through your intellect, your mind. A lot of our problems are caused because of our minds are running constantly, right? I know mine does. Whenever I can find a way to quiet that down, and then I feel like I start getting information from my heart or from my higher self or from my ancestral or guiding spirits, that's when my mind is not connected. And I get, there's a difference when you're receiving guidance, right? A lot of you, I'm sure, have experienced this. If you're just trying to think of in your mind a solution to something and you have different ideas, but when you actually get guidance from the spiritual realm, it's a whole different thing, right? It's a different experience. It's something that you may not have never have thought of ever, that just comes to you. And whether you think of it as coming from your subconscious or your higher self or your spiritual guides, it comes from the same source with a capital S. So this chapter also doesn't have a practice we can do together, because it's talking about the difference between head knowledge versus belly knowledge. And I've just been reading a text I mentioned last week. It's the I can't remember the Chinese name, but The Secret of the Golden Flower is how it's often translated. And there's two translations that I know of. One by Richard Wilhelm, who is the guy one of the first people that translated the I Ching. The Wilhelm version, where the introduction was written by Carl Jung. But there's a lot of problems with that introduction, with that translation, because he didn't really understand Taoism or Taoist thought. He was more of a sinologist. And so that I Ching is more of a Confucian, it's a German translation or a Confucian version of the book. And that's why I recommend my teacher, Nihua Ching, although there's other I Chings out there that are also really good. But he also wrote A Secret of the Golden Flower, and there's a newer version by Thomas Cleary that's actually much better. And he actually takes the time to point out the mistakes that were made in the earlier translation. Because a lot of these books, these Taoist books that were written in the 40s and 50s and 60s, were by people who could translate Chinese, but were not practitioners. So they didn't really understand the practices, right? You can always tell the difference between a scholar who knows how to translate the text as opposed to a practitioner who may not be as big a scholar, but has studied practices with people so that they know these teachings. They've embodied these teachings. That's what's so important. So, and in this ancient text, Secret of the Golden Flower, the reason I bring it up, and I brought it up last week, is the ancient Taoists were talking about the two minds, the mind in our head and the mind in our belly, the brain in our head, the brain in our belly, which nowadays we know is true biologically. I think it's interesting when people 1,000 years ago came up with these ideas. So this next one, chapter 20, is one of my favorites. And there's actually a typo here. The first two lines are actually the last two lines of the chapter before it. And the editors didn't catch that when they put this book together. You won't believe how many layers of editing this book went through, at least 3 or maybe 4, but it's impossible to catch everything. And so that got through. But then again, it's good to read it again. Give up intellectual learning and you'll have no worries. I see a chat here. The immortal true accounts of the 250-year-old man, Li Qingyun. If you just know the part about the immortal true accounts of the 250-year-old man, that would be enough. Agreement and disagreement, are they really so different? Which isn't to say that you can't disagree with someone, but he's saying sometimes people are arguing over finer and finer points, and they're really not saying anything that much different from each other. But people are so attached to being right. Remember, letting go, releasing the feeling or the experience of having to be right. Good and evil, are they really so far apart? What others fear, must I also fear? This nonsense is unending. Other people are happy as if they are a great feast. In spring, they merrily ascend the hills to see the sights. I alone remain tranquil and unmoved, like an infant who doesn't know how to laugh. I am exhausted with no home to return to. Other people have much while I possess nothing. I seem like a fool. Other people are clear while I alone am confused. Other people are clever while I feel dull, or I seem dull. I feel lost at sea, tossed about on the winds of a storm. Everyone else has things to do while I appear thick-headed and stupid. Yet, I am different from the others, because I am nourished by the Great Mother. So he's saying other people seem to have it down. They seem to know what they're doing. They seem to be getting ahead in their life. And I seem like a dolt or simple-minded even. And so when other people look at me, because I'm not in the big rat race, I'm not running around like all the other people, they think I'm acting like a child. But actually, I have a connection that's different from those others. I have something that is an eternal connection to the Great Mother, which is another term for Tao that ancient Taoists used. You know, you're probably all familiar with the Buddhist deity named Guan Yin. Guan Yin is actually a Buddhist deity. She's the Bodhisattva of mercy and compassion, but you actually see her in a lot of Taoist temples also, because she represents that compassionate maternal aspect of Tao or of the universe. My teacher Hua Qingni says, before a human being enters the physical plane to become individualized, he or she resides in the cosmic womb of nature. This is on page 82. In some respects, this is analogous to the experience of being a fetus in the womb of one's physical mother. While contained in your mother's womb, you were one with her. Whatever your mother experienced, you also experienced. In the process of birth, you became separated from your mother. Your direct communication to her was cut. Similarly, before being born into this plane, we were one with nature and thus with universal law, before we came into this plane of existence. After being born into the physical plane, we must rediscover universal law and restore our innate spiritual ability. By doing so, we reestablish our direct connection with nature, the cosmic mother of the universe. Students of Taoism, and this, not just students of Taoism, I should say that people who connect to the universal mother of many different religions, whether it's the Virgin Mother, whether it's Lakshmi or Hindu deities, this Buddhist idea of Guan Yin, this whole idea of the Great Mother is something I think is hardwired into the human psyche. And so we have a nice little meditation here called the Great Mother Meditation. And I just wanted to share a couple lines from here. He is saying that Lao Tzu, the person who's describing himself in this chapter, feeds from the source of all life, while the others, those people of the world, feed on illusions. He is connected to the beginningless and endless primordial yin, while they exhaust their yang, chasing after phantoms, all the while thinking they are accumulating the good and important things of life. It has always been this way. Taoists are a bunch of free-thinking, free-acting, individuated individuals. They are artists, poets, musicians, hermits, healers, and diviners. In China, Taoists often travel from temple to temple, from teacher to teacher, from mountain to mountain, and the term they use for these kind of people are called cloud wanderers. So it's not like in Buddhism where someone joins a temple or a monastery and they stay there forever. A lot of Taoists are constantly on the move, going from mountain to mountain, from teacher to teacher, doing different kinds of practices. That's the problem sometimes with setting up our the things I do when I'm bringing people to China. We set up something with, like last year, we set up something with a teacher in this mountain. And when we got there, he was suddenly off cloud wandering and we had no way of getting in touch with him. So we didn't get to work with him. And we need to respect that. Even within Taoist temples, different people pursue different studies. Some people are dedicated to meditation. Some people are dedicated to studying the sutras. Some people are dedicated to like running the temple and dealing with the tourists, because all the temples in China have to be open to the tourists. This is how they support themselves, a lot of it. They don't get a lot of money from the government. And so they charge admission. It's not much, but they charge admission. And a lot of tourists come barging through the temple, and that's unfortunately something that the Taoist people and even the Buddhist people have to put up with nowadays. But the idea is that the individualized people it's respected. You, a person of not great intellectual learning, you don't study the text, you're the person who cooks the rice. Other people set up their rituals and other people play the music, and some people are the high priests of the rituals, men and women. Some people spend hours of each day studying ancient texts, some become healers. Of course, people are needed to cook and clean it and minister the temple itself. As we travel on this journey to oneness, this is the 81 steps, it's a journey to oneness, we must be prepared to deal with others in what the Taoists call the world of dust. That's what they call like the material world, the world of dust. When someone is like heading into the mountains or heading into a deep spiritual practice, they call it wiping the dust of the world off their shoes. That's an ancient term for it. We may not understand what we are doing and where we're going. Others may think we are deluded and getting nowhere, like he describes himself in this chapter. The important thing is to remain humble and stay on the path, even if it is a pathless path. The journey of Tao is not for the dilettante or for someone who is shopping around in the spiritual supermarket. We must send our roots very deep before we can spread them wide. The Chinese say that when looking for water, it is better to dig one hole very deep than many holes in a shallow way. This journey we are on must be traveled step by step, even if one step may be bigger than another. So we're going one step at a time, but sometimes some of these steps are like great leaps, right? As we go along our path, we feel like we're taking a great leap. Other times it feels like we're sort of slogging through the mud, going very slowly, but it doesn't matter because we're still on the path. As long as we are on the path, we are moving. And as long as we're on the path, we get support from the spiritual realm. So this is a great mother meditation. And in this one, we're going to connect to our lower Dantian, because that connects to the sort of spiritual or universal umbilical cord. Just like when we're connected to our mother in utero, we are receiving all our nourishment through the umbilical cord. We're not breathing through our lungs because we're in a sac of amniotic fluid. We're doing it through our umbilical cord, through our navel. Now in Chinese medicine and most Qigong teachers that I've studied with, the lower Dantian is considered 3 finger widths like this below the navel. But in ancient Taoist alchemical texts or Neidan texts, it's considered the lower Dantian is behind the navel. So you can work with that a little bit yourself, practice with that and see what you feel. And so once again, we're closing our eyes, going within. And we feel like our Dantian, which really encompasses our lower abdomen. It can really encompass our whole lower abdomen, really. That we are connecting through our navel, through our umbilical cord to the Great Mother. and really kind of get a sense of what that feels like, that it's not just something we're doing in our imagination. In the beginning, when we do these practices, we have a phrase called imagination becomes reality. So we're using our imagination, we're seeing colors, we're seeing energy fields, but eventually when we do these practices long enough, they become very real. Allow yourself to begin feeling a flow of energy between you and your original mother, what Hua Qing calls the cosmic womb of nature. And remember, what the mother feels and experiences, you also feel and experience. And also what you feel and experience, the mother also feels and experiences. So the energy is going both ways. When we feel that connection, we feel that energy of the Great Mother coming into us. We feel all our worries and fears and our desires to be held, to be nurtured, to be fed by the Great Mother. We feel that all flowing from her into us. Draw a deep sustenance from this connection. As you experience the state of being a baby in the womb of the Great Mother, feel how well you are fed by her. Draw on her strength and fill yourself with her power. And another chapter says, know the yang, but embrace the yin. So while we have the Father Sun, the Yang Sun, which really gives life to everything on our planet, we're also connected to the cosmic yin, which is another part of this universe. It is the earth that we live upon. The water that runs through the earth, runs through our veins, runs through the veins of the trees all around us. And another way we connect with the Great Mother is when we are in nature, when we are in the trees, in the mountains, by the river, by the ocean. We can pick up that primal yin, gathering that primal yin and filling ourselves with that nurturance. Feel how her wisdom guides and protects you. Don't be afraid to be different from the crowd. Don't be afraid to appear as a fool to others for not racing after the things the rest of the world race after. Don't be afraid to feel lost and tossed about on the winds from time to time. Just like we did earlier, we're releasing that feeling of needing to be in control at all times, needing to be right at all times, needing to know what we're doing at all times, just feeling like the mother is there. We are in the embrace of the eternal universal mother. And when difficult challenges arise, it's not because we're being judged or punished, but because it's part of the natural cycle of things. Storms comes and branches of trees fall off. Sometimes parts of our body are removed or come off, parts of our psyche, but it's all part of nature. It's all part of the flow of nature, as we are. We are also nature. We talk about going into nature and doing nature practices, but we human beings are also a part of nature. We are also natural beings when we're being natural, when we're letting go of the intellectual and cultural layers of acculturation and judgment and self-judgment. Remember, the sage is the one who returns people to their childlike hearts. You can always remind yourself to reconnect to the mother in any time. She is always there for you. She doesn't judge you. She's there for you to call upon. She's a part of you. In a way, when you see the ancient drawings of these kinds of practices, you see a person meditating and then you see in their belly another baby, an infant. Sometimes it's called the golden baby or the red baby. And the idea is that we do these deep, deep practices and we actually create a new life, a new self, a new baby. We give birth to our new self. We become the mother, giving birth to our new self, our spiritual self. So in this way, we are connected with the universal mother. And by doing deep practices, we ourselves become a mother to give birth. So once again, we'll rub our palms together 36 times. And then put them over your eyes and breathe the warmth of your Lao going up into your eyes, up into your brain, up into your upper dantian. Get up and down your face, across your ears, and around your earlobes. Another thing you can do in the evening, or if you're working on a computer a lot, you feel like your brain is becoming a little dull. We did this once before. It's called beating the heavenly drum, where you close your hand over your ears, blocking your ears completely, and then flick your fingers like this on your base of your skull. And you hear this big, both ears, both hands over both ears. And then flick. I'll take my hat off. I wear the hat because my head is so shiny in the light. But for this, we need to take it off. 36 times. And doesn't that feel kind of refreshing? So I'm going to open these last few minutes. We'll go over a little bit because I was goofing around with the photo in the beginning. So if anyone has any questions or comments, you can unmute yourself. No, everybody's full. People are feeling full. I know this is a lot of material. We cover a lot of material rather quickly, but it's just, I so want to honor our time together. You know, I'm so grateful to be able to take time out of my rather challenging life right now to be able to forget about all that and to go into these beautiful places that we get to share in this 1 hour we get to spend every week. So I'm really glad that people have decided to come around again. And I'll post this thing tomorrow. I'm also going to post a couple of those invocations I told you about. And it's just the kind of thing where you just I just read them. And really, as you're reading them, really, it's not like, sometimes I joke, and I was raised a Catholic, and we used to go to confession and confess our sins when I was 8 years old. I don't know what kind of sins I could possibly do, but and then what was called a penance, you had to say like the Hail Mary like 12 times. So I always say you can tell an ex-Catholic or a Catholic by how fast they can say the Hail Mary, because you had to say it 12 times. So as a kid, especially, we didn't even know what it really meant, but you would just, Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among Jesus, blessed from the name of Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now at the hour of time of our death. Amen. So you can get it in really fast. But when you're doing these kinds of invocations, you really want to go slower and really feel and express each one of the lines, because it's really bringing something out in you and bringing out a connection to universal source. And they're all Taoist things, but they come from my teacher, Hua Ching Ni. So unless anyone else has any questions, comments, we'll say goodnight. I'll go eat dinner. You guys can go back to your life, and we'll meet here again next Wednesday. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lalo. We'll see you. Thanks very much for starting this one next time.
Okay.
That was
Great.
great.
Okay.